Do you think that beyond strategy and how a team's coached and all that good stuff that obviously enhances and emphasizes how good a team and the players look, are there actually Western players where you think they really are as good as the best Korean at their position? Are there some that really do stand up to the test, or at least they could definitely be there if they had all those other things around them?
It's hard because they don't speak the same language, you know. So it's like such a weird question to fill in. Right now, currently, I mean, I would like to see FORG1VEN speaking Korea, working in an org, if he would listen to the infrastructure. Yeah, sure. I mean, FORG1VEN, at times, if FORG1VEN spoke Chinese and he went to China like season 3 or 4, easy. I think he could have gotten around there. Bjergsen, at his peak, I think was close to the top players. Like, maybe, like, there's a difference though, like, if you talk about like mids is like top players, like, do you mean top players or do you mean like top players and Faker? Because Faker at his peak...
I mean, Faker's different, right?
Yeah.
He's the ultimate... That's why I called him the ultimate outlier. It's like, it's almost unfair to compare anyone to Faker.
Yeah, so like if we're talking like top level players, yeah, there have been some Western players that maybe had it in them. I mean, earlier seasons, like season 2, Doublelift was one of the better AD carries. Like Wei Xiao in China was then the best probably in the world, and better than the Koreans, right?
Yeah. Let's look at these players one by one and see what's going to happen here, because I think this team has a chance to be extremely good. I think this is one of the best hopes for the West period we've ever seen in the LCS era. Obviously, we haven't seen them play a game yet, so this is just initial expectations and preconceptions of what these players could be together and what they are alone. So let's start with FORG1VEN. You've got to start there, because this is the star of the team. If this team is going to make it to like a semi-finals of a Worlds or qualify for Worlds or win LCS, it's all going to start with FORG1VEN, because this is the guy where he has the mentality that he wants to be the best player in the world. He wants to be the best AD carry, to have all the attention, to smash lane every time, to get all the CS every time, to get 1v1 kills, to carry the team fight, to not die, because him staying alive at the end and keeping his gold lead intact is going to be what allows you to have a chance to win the game. And he's fantastic at all those aspects if you can support him in that way. As someone who was there before season 4 and then has seen all the seasons since, what is your actual take on FORG1VEN? And it has to be the whole take. It can't just be when he was in Copenhagen Wolves and everyone thought he was great. It can't just be at the end when you got it back together. What about the whole time? What's your take on FORG1VEN as an AD carry?
My take on FORG1VEN is just that he's just a mechanical god. Like, he would be like the Uzi of Europe, you know. He's like a cannon, and you point him at something, he'll just kill everything. He was so good mechanically to the point where it made me innovate my own play. Because I remember that in season 4 spring, I would play against this guy. I was like, wow, this guy is like pulling out these mechanics that I was like, wow. Like, I didn't even know you could do that with your champion, like cancel your autos this fast and move this much between autos. And it really made me rethink my own gameplay in the off season, which led to me then becoming like a very dominant player in the summer split of season 4. Because I was trying to copy him, because I was like, you know, this guy, his movement and his attacking on Lucian is just like, it's something I haven't really seen before, so I'm just going to try to copy it. And that's like the biggest impression he's made on me. He's like a very, very passionate, very, very mechanically strong player.
So he's obviously someone who, in every split he's played, if people get FORG1VEN, they go, wow, brilliant player, love him as an AD carry, hate his personality, too many problems, you know. And then obviously in a lot of his teams he left after one split. So what would happen, the joke we used to have in the community was, well, if you like FORG1VEN as a player, but you can't have him, and you want someone not as bad as a person, I've got the perfect guy for you. It's Freeze, right? Just get him. And that is what like 2 or 3 teams did, because the angle that makes people not know this is, right, they know it happened in Copenhagen Wolves. They don't know it almost happened in SK when he got kicked out, and then it obviously did happen in H2K. So this kind of was a thing, right? It must have been to some degree what some of these teams thought.
Well, it was me and FORG1VEN's playstyle was very similar. We even before all the tournaments began, we used to play on East Nordic and East server, and we were both very high rated players, and we were basically having the same playstyle, and we kept playing versus each other, and we respected a lot each other, and we remain friends still today. You know, where FORG1VEN is someone I respect. FORG1VEN is someone that is better than me or was better than me most of my career, and he had a similar play. Oh, he was considered better. then like I was obviously a cocky and I thought, I'm on the same level as Forgiven, but sometimes I wasn't. Sometimes he was worse, sometimes I was better, as I said before, with top 3 ADs. But he was on like not inspiration, but we had the same similar style, and he was very, very good at what he was doing. And basically, I was slightly worse at what I was doing, but I had a better behavior. So when teams didn't like Forgiven as a personality, they often chose me because I could do, let's say, an 80%, when Forgiven was the best AD in the whole West, or people were saying he was the best AD in the whole West. I could do 80% of what he did, basically, and be more friendly, or less of a upfront dude, because Forgiven is someone that when he doesn't like someone or something, he's gonna straight up say it,
With the way I'm developing, that Schalke would also want a reserve player, in a sense that in case things go wrong, they also have me, who's like ready to play, can perform, stuff like this. So I thought it was my best shot at getting ADC and also improve.
By the way, very smart move, because for people who don't know, Forgiven has never actually completed 2 full splits with any team in the history of League of Legends. So you actually picked your career path perfectly there, man. That was actually genius. You were like those guys in like NASCAR who just drift behind the leading car, knowing eventually they'll get a chance to overtake. Like, you played that perfectly. Well done.
I mean, I didn't really know the 2 splits thing, because like I said, I actually only started watching competitive, I think, like just before a H2K Worlds run, and I don't even remember. Like, I'm completely new to the scene, like relative to you guys. So
I have one question though. If you're going to say that right now, you've just placed it that you only started watching just before, right? Here's the question that you have to answer about Forgiven in Axe. The only one that you are obliged to answer this whole episode. After all the shit that went down, after all the stuff with his teammates, you're replacing him, then you win this massive game that makes him look really foolish, right? You're making like, I didn't even really know who this Forgiven guy was. Why did you literally do his fucking gesture of like the shh thing, which obviously added 10 times more salt into the wound? Like, that sounded like you did know about Forgiven. I'm just saying.
I obviously, I use Twitter as well, just like any sports player. So I mean, it wasn't BM. It wasn't like anything.
It was a bit BM. Come on.
It was a banger. That's what it was.
And it was good. Listen, straight fire. I can't lie. It was a bit BM though.
I can see why it's BM, but my intention wasn't that. Obviously, I knew that if I did that, like, people would think that I'm BMing him. But literally, the reason is, and you guys will laugh, but literally the reason is, I'm a complete random, and I need the Twitter clout for my brand.
Fair enough. Okay, that's a good answer. That's a good answer.
I'm not even joking.
Right, Veteran, this feels like a perfect... He's actually raised a classic Forgiven topic there that I think we can talk about, which is, right, Forgiven uses the angle where it's like, as long as he wasn't the worst player in the game, it's not his fault. So if he does things and he expects like the jungler to do something, or he expects people to peel for him in a team fight, or he expects that he can push all the time and people should play around that, his logic is, as long as that wasn't the worst move, then it's your fault for not doing what he expected. But one of the problems I have with that scenario is that isn't actually how AD Carry is played at all in 2020. Like, he wasn't playing the meta champions. He wasn't good on the meta champions. He would just farm. He would expect people to he would expect people to peel for him, who by his own logic haven't peeled for him for the last 3 weeks. Like, at some point in time, you have to take responsibility yourself and say, I'm going to do within the reasonable set of circumstances I have what makes sense to win the game. You can't just play to some unattainable ideal and then just say, right, anything that doesn't work in the game, I'm going to blame my teammates for. If people don't know, when the notorious, the infamous Forgiven was your teammate, right?
Yeah.
If people don't know, he was always a maniac, right? And so one of the things he would do, and this is so nuts, is he would openly flame people who were his current teammates. And so when he was in Copenhagen Wolves, and I'll say, listen, he was a very good player. I would even say he was arguably an MVP candidate. You know, he was a beast. Yep. But I remember him even making comments where he was clever enough, at least, okay, this is his version of tact, to not explicitly say the names of the players he was talking about. But he kept referencing how 2 of his teammates were like Hard Stock Diamond or something, like, because there's another thing, Forgiven was always like obsessed with the idea that like you had to be like the best in Challenger as well. And, you know, like, He was referring to you, right? You were one of the players, as far as I know, right, who didn't really like you didn't ladder that much, right? Or it wasn't the end of the world to not be in Challenger and be in LEC or UELCS, right? What would you say to that? Because obviously if people hear that, I mean, I know fans think, I know it's always easier to tell other people what to do, isn't it? All fans are like, why don't you just practice like a Korean and say, I have a fucking life, okay? Give us your thoughts, because it's going to sound bad when we say it like that. So give us your perspective on it.
First, I think Forgiven deployed one of the best and most funny strategies, which was he would usually post something on his Greek Facebook, and then it would end up on the front page of Reddit. Like, I didn't know that there were people that were going to translate it on Reddit.
That's pretty clever. That's pretty shrewd, actually, yeah. But the second you don't win the split, or you have a loss, or you think to yourself, like the classic one in your case, this is the reason why I always told people this story. Like, Forgiven did such an amazing job for Freeze in his career, because what he advertised was, do you like a player pretty good, but with like only mildly toxic attitude? Freeze is kind of like Forgiven light, and then everyone would just bring in Freeze and he would just get the same gig. Like Freeze himself even jokes and says, yeah, he sort of did do that, right? When you say this, give us some thoughts on that, because again, people think he just played a split and he was like, these guys are shit, so I'm going to go and I'm going to wait out a split, I'm going to go elsewhere. Like, what was he actually like as a teammate? What are your actual thoughts on his skill set? And like, basically, I'm sure you can, like, what do you think of the reasons why he had to be kicked from these teams? Because as we say, he was a pretty good player.
I do think it was a toxicity, and he was just quite aggressive. I have to say this was like 7 years ago, so I don't remember a lot of things. I remember like the overarching things and a few funny stories here and there, because he was a character you could really laugh with, but also really hate. And he got into fights with teammates, and sometimes he was backstage shouting like, why the fuck did you throw this game? What are you doing? It was a fun time. We had to play for playoffs. Like, there was a really weird system. We had to play against Gambit in a best of 3, and the winner would make it to playoffs. In the first game, I think Cowdered and I kind of carried the game, but it was really sloppy, and then he almost got into a fist fight with Amazing backstage because the game was really sloppy and wasn't clean enough, and it was just like, come on, hit me to Amazing, and they almost got in a fist fight. Of course, we lost the next 2 games, didn't make playoffs, but that was the end of that. It was absolutely hilarious, but he's a guy you could really laugh with, but yeah, he was also very wild when you were losing or not playing well.
Because I agree, by the way, one thing I do think actually is, even to this day after all that everyone knows, the one thing I do think about Forgiven's career is, if no one knows, Young Buck hinted at this in my reflections, effectively Forgiven has been kicked from every team he was ever on in the LEC. Like, if not like out overtly, they just didn't offer him a contract, so they effectively said, we don't want you. Now, the reason for that, by the way, is not ever that he was the worst player, and it's not even that he was always so untenable as a teammate. It's that, like you were saying, Rich, he just always put himself in the crosshairs at every possible instance. And so the obvious thing everyone would think when it like something needs to change, the answer, it just springs to mind of like, why don't we get rid of the guy shouting at us all the time? Like, it's just the obvious thing you're going to think, isn't it? Well, even though, by the way, there was another famous pattern that a lot of people won't know, and this is real, except for Schalke. Schalke is the only team that excluded from this pattern. Every team Forgiven left was way worse than XSplit. That's a fact. You can go and look it up. They never, in fact, except for Schalke, none of them ever even achieved the same level of height that they were at with Forgiven. Now that tells me it can't just be that this guy was an arsehole,
But to one of the points you thought about, right? Yeah. I think one thing people can say is Forgiven's career somewhat got screwed over because he didn't have any good coaches, because coaches didn't exist. Coaches didn't exist at that time, at least at a good level, right? I think if Forgiven with his skill and even attitude was in a team with an excellent coach, he could perform so much better and he could have been one of the best players in the world. But sadly, his attitude alone needed help from a supportive character, right? Or a good coach. And if he had that, I think he would have performed so much better. And we would probably still see him today.
Yeah, I mean, if the scene was like developed, let's just say like 20 years from now, and you had some like wily, seen it all, done it all, like 50-year-old bloke who was like, a more sort of authoritarian style figure, then I absolutely agree with that. I think you maybe could. I wouldn't specifically blame, certain things that went wrong with Forgiven on Prolly, because I think that one, esports was obviously very primitive at the time. And 2, I do think Prolly had like very extreme strengths, which even Forgiven respected, and Forgiven doesn't respect that many people by default, So I think he actually was able to control Forgiven more than most, just because Forgiven had such an underlying respect for someone who could tell him things about the game that he didn't know, which obviously to him is like a crazy concept, right? But yeah, no, absolutely. Like, again, I mean, even now, right, however many years on, 6, 7 years on, there's just very few people in the scene who would be capable of dealing with a Forgiven. In fact, if you told me, let's just say Forgiven was back at his apex, best AD carry in the West, he's going to be joining a new team, you put, you know, any of us in charge of making decisions for that team, and you tell me, hire a coach that's going to deal with this guy, and I have to give you a name, I'm struggling to come up with someone who would have the package to deal with that. And again, that's, by the way, that's not a slight at Forgiven in this instance. That's a slight at how we deal. Right? Yeah, the pool of coaches. So
I may not have the most supporters in the world, but the ones I do have are straight fire, and they include Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Frisky, Ahmed Hadjou, Torin, Tobias Bernasconi, Animosity, Tosh, Jensen Goh, and you know it always is a special thanks going out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my show? Do you want to see things I say on my Discord, little piece of straight fire I drop in the Patreon only channels, stories I tell people in the other ones? Do you want to ask a question in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers, find out who the next guests are for reflections interviews? Maybe you want to be one of those people who takes part in the long form discussion with me where we talk about whatever's on your mind in esports. Well, if any of those or more sound interesting, why not support me, put your money where your mouth is, and join the Scrolluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.